New mom. This is for mornings that smell like coffee, milk, and a new beginning. In the next few minutes, we'll turn tender chaos into calm momentum. Here's what you'll get. Postpartum safe exercises that start where healing starts: your breath. We'll reconnect your pelvic floor and deep core without crunches. Wake up stiff hips and shoulders, and build gentle strength you can do between feeds. Then we'll step outside for walking with baby, using a baby sling. Kangaroo. How to fit your sling: support baby's neck and knees, dial in posture and pace, and add moves on the go. Glute squeezes, calf raises, and mindful breathing that lulls your little one to sleep. Expect real-time cues, field-tested tips, kind modifications for every birth story, and what to avoid early on. Clear activity with your provider. Grab water and your sling, and give yourself permission to go slow. Ready? Stay with me, and let's build strength, steadiness, and joy one small step at a time. But before the video starts, write in the comments, from where you are watching this video, thank you. She liked to imagine the morning as a thread she could pick up after a night unraveled by milk and murmurs. A pale filament of light drawn across the floorboards and the kitchen tiles and the soft edge of the bassinet, like a quiet promise that did not need to shout to be believed. And in that hush, she would stand with one hand on the kettle and the other resting on the small, warm bundle of her son. Feeling the gravity of him, the certainty of him, the way his breath stitched itself to hers. A metronome more ancient than the clocks on the wall. And there, taped to the refrigerator with the cheerful magnet shaped like a lemon, was the little card from the clinic with its tidy font and gentle authority, the words that seemed both instruction and benediction. A gateway between the swelling ritual of pregnancy and the strange blank book of what came after. Postpartum Exercises. Preparation for pregnant women. She had tucked that card into a cookbook once, had lost it, and then found it, had read the title, and flushed with a mixture of relief and resistance. For there was the clarity of syllables: postpartum exercises, preparation, standing straight as pillars, and then there was the soft human fog that filled the room in the predawn. All the things that could not be made into pillars. The sleeplessness and the tremble of muscles that had learned 1,000 new ways of being. The map of her body redrawn by tides she had not known it could hold. She felt like a house that had been expanded from the inside, a cathedral whose stained glass had learned to open and close. On the counter sat a glass of water with a lemon slice drifting like a tiny sun. And in the corner of the glass a cluster of bubbles clung to the glass like a constellation, and she saw herself in them. The way each bubble borrowed its shape from an invisible outline. The way each day's plan took its curve from the contours of a baby's nap and a hunger that did not consult the clocks. And she laughed at the thought that preparation had ever meant certainty, when really it meant learning the choreography of improvisation, learning how to be steady in motion. The city outside her window was just beginning to blink awake, a delivery truck sighing at the curb, a street cleaner dragging its bristles like a slow cello across the asphalt, and she felt that strange kinship with everything that had a job to do. The kettle boiling and clicking off. The stray cat leaping from fence to fence with a responsibility to its own secret kingdom. The heat hiss in the radiator. The small flex of her calf as she rocked on her heels and watched the baby's eyelashes flutter in some private dream. All of it a reminder that life is the accumulation of tiny tasks and holy nothings. The way you fill a day like you fill a lung, inhaling what you can, exhaling what you must. In the weeks before the birth she had kept a notebook. Neat bulleted lists that pretended the future could be contained, but now she wrote in long, sweeping lines, no indentation. Just one thought leaning into the next until the page looked like a river that would not be dammed, and she realized that the preparation had not been a schedule but a surrender, not a plan but a permission slip. She signed to herself saying, you will not know everything, and you will still be enough. And in that allowance she found a quiet that felt like the moment before a song begins. On the second morning of the second week, when the apartment's walls felt like a cloak that had grown too heavy, she wrapped her son in the soft sling, whose fabric smelled faintly of cotton and sun-warmed wind. And she slid his tiny legs into the pouch and tightened the loops until his weight was her weight, close enough that she could kiss the fine hair at his temple without bending. And she stepped into the hallway with the careful ceremony of a priestess crossing into a sanctuary whose rules were not written but were felt in the bones. And the door swung shut behind them with a padded sound that seemed to say, go on, try, go see. And at the bottom of the stairs, pinned to the corkboard with a thumbtack, a flyer from the community center smiled at her with a line that echoed the card on her fridge and yet sounded like a destination, like a path through the park, like something that could become a ritual if she let it. Walking with baby. Using a baby sling, Kangaroo. It sounded like a dance, a slow procession of the newly initiated moving through the bright of day. And she smiled at the memory of the instructor with the sultan pepper hair, who had shown them how to tie the sling, how to tuck the knees, and support the neck, how to be a human rocking chair that could move and breathe and whisper, and even though they had all laughed then, and she had felt self-conscious in her pregnant grace, now the laughter was a thread she could follow, a bridge between what she had been and what she was learning to be with every step. And so she walked into the morning, her feet relearning the city's grammar, the semicolons of crosswalks and the commas of stoplights, the long lilt of the boulevard under a line of elms whose leaves made small confetti of the sun atop her shoulders. The baby slept at once, the promise of motion more convincing than any lullaby, and she felt the seam of herself stitching tighter with each block, not because walking undid the ache or the tender heaviness at her hips, but because walking made a sentence out of the scattered words of her body. And when a sentence makes sense, it does not mean it is easy, it means it knows itself. She breathed like the tide, slow and generous, and waved to the old man who watered his roses with a green hose, whose snakish loop curled and unfurled with each turn of his wrist. And she noticed the way the street held so many small unadvertised kindnesses, the teenager who held the door with an awkward nod, the barista, who slipped her a napkin and an extra splash of oat milk, as if to say, you're doing it, the bench that offered itself like a pause in a long thought, and she realized that movement, even the smallest, braided together the parts of her that had been newly separated and needed reminding that they were still one, a mother and a woman and a person who saw the world and was seen by it in return. On the third block, where the eucalyptus trees made the air taste like a green song, she sat and watched the baby dream in miniature, eyelids fluttering like pages in a breeze, tiny mouth pursing into shapes that suggested laughter and milk in some secret conversation with the stars. And she pressed her palm flat against her abdomen and felt the intricate topography of change. The tenderness like a watercolor wash over muscles that had done brave work, the reminding ache that said gently, gently, and she listened because listening was now part of her daily practice, and she found that what the pamphlets called recovery she preferred to call returning, not to an old country but to a new house built on a familiar street, not to the person she had been but to a self expanded by a moon. And when she closed her eyes, the phrase from the refrigerator slid across her mind, not like an instruction, but like a lullaby-esque refrain. The way you hum the same line to a baby, not because you must, but because it teaches your mouth how to be tender. And she found that even in stillness there was the softest choreography, the placement of her shoulders like setting two cups on a table, the lengthening of her exhale like unwinding a ribbon, the subtle gathering at the base of her spine that felt like a name whispered in a quiet room. And she let these little attentions accumulate until they felt like a hymn written without paper. Until she understood that exercise, in this tender era, could be a prayer that asked nothing but presence. A woman with a stroller paused and asked how old, and when she answered that he was as new as yesterday, but as old as the heartbeat she first heard in the stick-thin room of the clinic, they both laughed at their own poetry. And the woman told her about the group that met on Thursdays to walk the big loop around the reservoir and the way they moved like a flock, like dots on a map becoming a path, and how sometimes they said nothing at all, just breathed and listened to the sound of their shoes on the gravel and the small soft chorus of sleeping babies. And she promised to go, not as a pledge to hustle toward some finish line, but as a promise to keep showing up to her own days, to keep making the world a place where her feet fit. On the way home, a breeze lifted the tiny hairs at her son's neck, and he snuffled against her collarbone, and she thought of old myths where people carry their gods wrapped close, talismans that warm with their own quiet fire, and she smiled at the thought that devotion can be measured in steps, that the sacred often asks us only to hold and be held and not rush the moment that is still becoming itself. At home, the afternoon lay like a gentle blanket over the furniture and the succulents on the windowsill, their plump leaves cupping light with the same easy greed as the baby's fingers cupped her own. And she felt a fatigue that was not defeat but a punctuation mark, something between a period and a rest. Note on a staff inviting the body to fold into the couch and let the day continue without insistence, and she obliged, tipping herself into the cushions with an animal sigh akin to gratitude, the sling still wrapped around her like a sash of permission. And in that valley of hours, the phone buzzed with messages, the world's river knocking at her shore, friends sending photos and little poems and reminders to drink water. A cousin forwarding an article that tried too hard to turn everything into goals and metrics, when really all she wanted was to be a sentence that did not need an exclamation point to be true. She remembered the water fountain by the park where a toddler in bright yellow boots had slapped the puddle with both hands like a drummer in love with his own noise. And she thought how every day from now on would contain such small coins of brightness she could tuck into her pocket for later use. And she decided that if preparation had a second act, it was not the rigidity of schedules but the soft discipline of noticing. The practice of being where you are with a generosity that includes yourself. The willingness to say, I will go slow because slow is honest right now, and I will sharpen my seeing as I sharpen my breath. The card on the fridge would remain there not as a verdict, but as a lighthouse, and the flyer on the corkboard. Downstairs would be joined by others' concerts in the park, a letterpress workshop, a farmer's market on Saturdays with strawberries that tasted like rain turned sweet, and in this collage she would find her days. Gathering shape not in straight lines but in a spiral, revisiting the same places with a deeper presence. Each time measuring progress, not by speed but by the depth of her yes. As the light withdrew from the room like a tide retreating to polish its shells, she kissed the baby's forehead and watched his mouth open into that O of dream drinking. And she felt a quiet vow forming, a sentence she would walk for years. To carry him until he walked. To stand beside him until he ran. To trust her body not because it did not falter but because it did, and still returned. And in that return to find herself again and again. A door that keeps opening, a path that keeps unfolding under the soft faithful percussion of 2 feet and then 4. A life written in steps and pauses, in the velvet hush of dawn and the bronze drift of evening. In all the sacred, ordinary ways that love teaches the body how to move.